Well, welcome along to Ipswich, where for the last few hours I've had the privilege of spending some time with renowned developer John Howard, and we're actually sitting in one of his penthouse apartments at his huge development in Ipswich on the waterfront, the Wine Rack. And John, I'm so glad to have the chance to speak to you about a question that pops up all the time on Property Tribes. And it's one of those very, very kind of basic starter questions for newcomer landlords. And that is, which is best, a house or a flat? Now, I've got my view, but I'm very interested to hear yours.
Well, of course, I'm a little bit biased because over the years I've done mostly flats, but I can understand the problem with buying a leasehold flat these days. You've got to be very careful. And of course, if you're buying it freehold house, you can do whatever you want. No one's there to tell you what to do. You just get on with it. With a flat, you're sharing that with a lot of other people. You've got to be understanding of those people. You've got a service charge issue, potentially. If the service charge is more than £1,000 or so a year, I'd be very careful. You can do something about that now. You can take over the management. If there's enough of you who want to take it over, you can appoint another management company. You can even buy the freehold. So the government have done a lot to help this situation because they realise it can be a potential problem.
Indeed, I'm glad you mentioned the service charges issue, because for me, when Nick and I started out, we bought 1- and 2-bed apartments in certain postcodes in London that we knew really, really well. And I soon had this realisation that I was getting these massive service charge bills. They really do eat into the cash flow. And I think when you're starting out, you really, really need to focus on cash flow initially, because if you don't have cash flow, you can't remain in property, or less likely to remain in property for the long term to benefit from capital growth. So the number one reason I personally don't like flats for investment is the service charges biting into the cash flow.
I think that's absolutely right, and you just have to check before you start the process of buying a flat. You just need to know all the costs. And don't forget, if you're doing any work to that flat, you need the freeholder's permission to do so. And you want to make sure you get that permission before you buy it. So you're not running after them afterwards, begging them to give you permission. You've already got it. And if you don't get it, or they're difficult, you might decide it's not worth buying the flat.
Indeed, we also have to be careful of oversaturation as well with flats, because they can be built in large volumes, and quite often if you do your search on Rightmove and you speak to local agents, you'll find that there's a massive oversupply of flats, but there's a shortage of family homes. And that stresses the importance of doing due diligence before just kind of automatically assuming that a 1-bed flat is the best kind of starter investment.
Well, I would totally agree with that. And I would also say that if you go on some of the property portals, you'll see an awful lot of flats available, and they look cheap. They look cheap. That is until you look to see what the service charge is. And I think a number of these flats, where they've been poorly managed with high service charges, are probably unmortgageable. They're probably only available to investors, really, because you could not get a first-time buyer mortgage on it, probably, because of the high service charge.
Now, you mentioned houses, that you have control of them, they're freehold. What I love about houses compared to flats is that you can force the appreciation through refurbishment or development. It's very hard, or if it's impossible really, to extend a flat, but if you've got a house with a back garden, or a loft, and other properties in the street have had loft conversions, you've got the opportunity there to actually add value, and that's important as well. It's a kind of safety net in a way.
I'm going to be very brave now and not completely agree with you.
No, please don't.
So with a flat, if you buy a flat that needs refurbishing or has a problem with the service charge, if you can deal with that problem and sort it out and all get together and reduce the service charge and so on, the flat price is going to go up dramatically. So you have to be a bit braver, I accept that, and you have to be perhaps a bit more sophisticated in your investing, but it is possible. It is possible to make money out of a leasehold flat, but you need to know what you're doing, and you need to be organised from the start. With a house, I accept it's easier. Be careful though, because check what the most a house goes for in the area that your house is in. Because if you make your house into something like Buckingham Palace, treble the size of it and so on, you're not going to get your money back. So be sensible. Invest in things that are going to add value, not just throw everything, including the kitchen sink at it and expect it to double its value, because it won't. So be careful what you do. Take the advice of an agent. You know, estate agent will give you free advice. If you don't like what you hear, talk to 2 or 3 and then make a decision on it. But they're there to help, so use them.
No, I totally agree, and they have so much local knowledge, and they're very generous, generally speaking, about sharing it. I think also, just picking up on what you said about flats and where you can make a margin, is if they've got a very short lease. That's another example of where you could buy what is a short lease flat, you know, have a lease extension undertaken, and then really increase the value of that property. So that would be a good example there, where a flat could be a good investment.
Vanessa, that's a brilliant example. You know what you're doing, you do. So that, I agree with entirely. That's a great way of making some money out of a flat. But just make sure that you can do all what you want before you buy it. Don't buy it and then think, oh yeah, I'll get it sorted now. Get organised beforehand. Make sure your solicitor agrees with what you're saying, and that it's possible to do that.
We've kind of touched on quite a few kind of advanced strategies, actually, that probably even somebody of myself, I am a very low risk investor. I'm quite willing to put my hands up to that. But I probably wouldn't even try a lease extension, if I'm honest. I think they probably are for the more experienced, but I accept everybody has a kind of different risk profile. But the other reason that I love houses, John, is that in my experience, again, you'll get a family in there and they'll tend to stay for, you know, quite a significant period, perhaps 4 or 5 years while their child's going through the local school. I found with flats the tenant turnover can be a bit higher and there could be more opportunities for voids. Do you have a view on that?
I wouldn't disagree with you. I think if you've got a house, you've got much more flexibility in who you rent it to, and they're more likely to stay longer. I agree. You might get a single person who wants to live in a 3-bedroom house, you never know, a couple or a family. So you've got much more flexibility and much more likely to stay longer. I agree entirely with you.
Now, if we're talking about starting out, my advice, again, from a low-risk point of view, John, is to keep it simple. You know, find a bread and butter workhorse where there's high tenant demand. Probably, you know, that's the safest way to start, isn't it?
The safest way to start is always keep it local, keep it simple. Okay, you may not make the margins that you hope you're going to make in the first deal or two, but as long as you're safe and you have an out before you have an in, you know what you're going to do if it goes wrong, then that is the way to do it, without question.
Yeah. I say this because I hear of, and I see people being, you know, like, for instance, newcomer landlords being recommended to jump straight into HMOs. Now, to my mind, that is an advanced strategy for somebody with a lot of tenant management, you know, experience and hands-on skills of managing, you know, multiple occupancy properties. Again, you know, not a good idea for a newbie to start out with an HMO, not to mention that they might struggle to get the finance because they don't have the required experience just on single occupancy buy-to-let. Do you have a view on HMOs and who should be involved with them?
Well, I think I've said a few times before, you know, they were called bedsits in my time when I was doing them, and I've done them, and you're right. There's a lot of hands-on experience that you need, in my view, to run a good HMO. I'm not saying some people can't. Some people are talented, you know, they can go straight into something and they're very organised and they can do it. But for the average person coming into property developing or investing, I would certainly cut your teeth on something a bit simpler first.
Yes, indeed, because I think tenant selection, tenant management, they're all very important skills that landlords need to develop to mitigate risk. Definitely.
And all the regulations now, you know, it has changed. It's very strict, and some councils don't want any more of these. So just be careful. If you are going to try and look into doing it, get hold of the council, speak to them and find out exactly what is required, because it's quite a lot of regulation now.
So I guess what we're saying, John, is that whether it be a house or a flat, the numbers have got to stack up. So you've got to do your due diligence, you've got to run your calculations, and you've got to check the tenant demand. And if you can tick all those boxes, then you can move forwards with something that's going to work for you and your circumstances.
I think everyone's circumstances are different. That's what I would say. And some people go into property, become multimillionaires. Some people go into it to replace their income or their salary with an income, so they're not working, which is absolutely fine. So once you know what you want to do, then you can go about doing it. But find out what you want to do first. Decide what you want to do first. Don't go chopping and changing your mind every 5 minutes. Stick. If you've got a policy or a strategy, stick to it for a little while and work it through.
No, I think that's very good advice. And just as we close out here, John, I know that you've got 3 criteria that you stick to when you're looking at a property deal that has obviously served you well, because you're still here 40 years later, still battling away, as you said. We're sitting in your development of 150 flats in Ipswich that you've done in association with Homes England, and I have to congratulate you on a wonderful product. But you stick to those 3 parameters before you will commit to buying a deal. And can you share those with us?
I certainly can. So if you're buying a deal, as far as I'm concerned, and whether you're, and I say a deal because you may want to keep it or you may want to sell it, it doesn't matter. It's still a property deal. So the first thing you should be able to do, once you've just bought it, you should be able to sell it on at a profit without doing anything to it. If you can't do that, you haven't bought it for the right money.
So that really does highlight the importance of buying at a discount.
You've got to buy it at the right money. You've got to get it well under market value somehow. The second thing is you should be able to refurbish it and sell it at a profit. And the third thing you should be able to do is refurbish it, let it, refinance it and get your money out to go again on another property. If you can't do all 3 of those things, you need options. And if you can't do all 3, then I wouldn't be looking at the deal in the first place. Now, I'm considered hard-nosed, aggressive by 1 or 2 people in terms of how I do my property deals, but I always do them with a smile on my face. And just because you're offering someone less money, you don't need to be embarrassed by it. At the end of the day, if they agree to sell it to you, they're happy. And that's the main thing. You are in it to try and make some money. That is the idea of being a property developer.
Absolutely. And something I learned from you when I attended your seminar in London recently, which, by the way, I had a fantastic afternoon of learning, was that actually it's not wrong to walk away from a deal if it doesn't stack up. Actually, I think you had a good saying in that respect as well. There were so many golden nuggets.
What I would say, that it's really important. If once you've done a due diligence, once you've agreed to buy it, you then look into it further. If it's not what you think it is, or the costs are a lot more than you thought, some of the best deals are the deals you don't do. So don't be frightened to walk away. The agent will tell you it's never happened to them before. You're letting the owner down, you're letting them down. Load of rubbish. An agent, unfortunately, has this happen to them every day. So don't worry about that. If it's not the right deal for you in the end, be brave, pull out, say you're sorry. You may find that they come back, of course, and chase you and say, well, how much will you pay? In which case you're in a fantastic position. So just be honest with yourself. Don't go ahead just because you feel you have to.
No, I think that's a really fantastic golden nugget. And there's so much learning to be had through going through the process of doing the negotiation. And as long as you can take some takeaways from it, and that you're honest and you're truthful with the vendor and the estate agent, you can actually take learning away from that situation.
You can learn from every situation, and I'm still learning.
That's what I love about John, because he's been doing this for 40 years. He's doing massive multi-million-pound projects, and you're still hungry to learn, aren't you?
And I still like doing small deals. This is a big deal for us. I'm just as happy doing, converting a house into 4 flats, or buying a house and selling it on for more money. I'm very happy doing those as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom here at Property Tribes. And if you're watching on YouTube, we do invite you to subscribe and also hit the notifications button. And all our discussions are actually hosted at propertytribes.com. We're so privileged to have John as a member of our community. He's been joining our discussions.
I'm delighted to be a member.
Oh, thank you, John. It's so great to have your input. So if you'd like to have some more discussions with John in person, then please do pop across to propertytribes.com and join our discussions, and you'll see John there. So thank you very much for talking to us here in lovely, sunny, beautiful Ipswich in your fantastic development, and good luck with all your projects.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.